On Tuesday morning, I stepped off the plane into an empty Ben Gurion airport. On Thursday morning, I returned to New Jersey, transformed. For 36 hours, I traveled to various locations in Israel with a group of 9 local rabbis, 1 cantor, 2 staff people from the Jewish Federation of Greater Metrowest, and 2 armed guards. I didn't feel unsafe at all. I felt like I was home. My second home looked and felt different. No one was out on the streets, and every conversation was about the war. But it was home nonetheless, and I was glad to be there. When we first arrived, I worried our visit was an imposition. The Israelis we were going to meet were grieving, or recovering from serious injuries, or advocating for the release of their kidnapped loved ones. Would being there be a burden or a distraction from more important matters? From the first encounter, I was proven wrong. Each and every person we met expressed such gratitude for our presence. They couldn't believe that we traveled to Israel for just 2 days to sit with them, hear their stories, give them hugs, and ultimately to bring their stories home. At the end of each visit, as we thanked the person in front of us for sharing their experience so openly with us, we were thanked in return for caring, for showing up, for supporting Israel, for representing our synagogues back in the States, for showing that the Jewish people are connected no matter what. I met so many amazing people and heard such powerful stories. Stories of grief and loss, trauma and pain. It won't surprise you that I was often in tears. And yet it felt different, crying there. Different than the tears I've shed these past few weeks here in New Jersey. When I was in Israel, I wasn't crying for Israel and the Jewish people. I was crying with Israel and the Jewish people. I wasn't far away. I was there. And I wasn't scared. The American Jewish community is so fearful right now, and I understand why. We have armed guards outside our temple for good reason. The threat of anti-Semitism is alarming, and it is real. The discourse about Israel online and on campus is ugly, and it is dangerous. I understand feeling scared. And I want us to feel strong, too. I want us to be proud to be Jewish, not like it is something to hide. I want us to feel proud to stand with the state of Israel and the people of Israel as they protect themselves, defend their country, and take care of each other in incredible ways. I want us to find the strength and resilience to get through these difficult days and weeks and months with fortitude and courage and moral clarity. Israel has a right to exist. Israel must defend itself and protect its citizens from future attacks. If what we ultimately want is peace, and it is, then Hamas cannot continue to rule in Gaza. Hamas will never make peace with Israel. For the sake of Israel and for the sake of the Palestinians in Gaza, Hamas must be defeated. As Rabbi David Wolpe wrote recently, the rabbis say that one who is kind to the cruel will end up being cruel to the kind. The rabbis remind us that allowing cruel people to pursue their designs in this world, says Wolpe, will ultimately lead to innocents running, terrified and helpless, as evil men shoot them in the back, kill their children, and rape the women. It will lead to October 7th. The great philosopher Maimonides, having fled from Almohad persecution in Spain in the 12th century, put it more comprehensively. Compassion toward the wicked, he said, is cruelty to all human beings. This is why there cannot be a ceasefire right now. The war must continue, and war is always awful. IDF soldiers will die, and civilians in Gaza will die. This painful reality is worthy of our tears. And yet, this war against Hamas is necessary. As Rabbi Wolpe reminds us, the terrorists did not fly over the fence chanting two-state solution. Hamas is a homicidal cult, as we have seen, and it has no borders. The crucial moral difference is that for Israel, the death of civilians is a tragic byproduct of war, and Israel tries to avoid it. For Hamas, the death of civilians is the point, the yearned-for result. 2 days ago, I visited Hadassah Hospital in Jerusalem, where in 5 days they have set up an underground emergency department fully equipped with everything an ICU needs to run effectively. We know what Hamas builds under their hospitals: terrorist tunnels. And still, we should grieve for the loss of innocent lives in Gaza. I am brought to tears by the devastating stories I heard in Israel and by the pictures coming out of Gaza. We can support Israel's right to exist and defend itself and weep for the devastating consequences of this war at the same time. As Rabbi Wolpe writes, we are in the paradoxical situation as a people who love peace, of saying to the world we must wreak more destruction, not because we cherish it or wish it, but because without it we are being cruel to the future. This is what I heard over and over again from every person I met these past 2 days, no matter their political leanings or level of religious observance. The Israelis I spoke to found no joy in the current situation, and yet each of them was certain that Israel has no choice but to fight this war. And so I'd like to share with you a few stories of some of the people I met this week. There are so many more. And so I look forward to continuing to talk together in the days that come. In the southern city of Ofakim, I sat with Ravit, whose husband Yigal was just 4 months away from retiring from the police force when he was killed on October 7th. Yigal was a big man. He was brave and proud and served on the police force in Ofakim for 30 years. He was just coming off a night shift when Hamas terrorists drove into his city and started going door to door shooting people. He was one of the first on the scene and organized the other officers into a line. Yigal was like a father to many of them and said very clearly that everyone should get behind him. No one was allowed to pass in front of him as they made their way down the street. He would go first. As Ravit said, that was Yigal, looking out for everyone else, taking the lead. The sirens were blaring. No one really knew all that was going on. But they knew that there were terrorists on the street in front of the houses, shooting people as they fled from their homes for the freestanding safe rooms right by the front sidewalk. They had to leave their homes to get to the safe room. This is where they were being shot. And still he said, "Let's go. Follow me." As they rounded a corner, Yigal was shot from above. At that moment, his fellow officers understood that not only were the terrorists on the street, there were also snipers on all the rooftops. They quickly pulled back around the corner, and every single one of those police officers behind him survived. At great risk to themselves, they eventually were able to retrieve Yigal's body and drag it out of the line of fire. He is remembered by Ravit and their children as a man of great courage, who saved the lives of his officers with 3 words: "Get behind me." Before we say Kaddish tonight, we'll light the Yizkor candle that Ravit gave to me in memory of Yigal. On Wednesday afternoon, I met Maayan Sherman, This is her son, Ron. You'll recognize the posters, I'm sure. Ron is 19 years old and just graduated from high school last year. She said he's a confident kid, stubborn, but in a good way, and makes friends easily. She said every day she gets a phone call from someone who said, Ron is my best friend. He's a soldier in the IDF and is working on an army base near Gaza on October 7th. His job is to stand at the border crossing and check the materials being brought through with the Gazans who work in Israel. He's a people person and he loved his job. That morning, he was woken by the sound of sirens and began texting with his mom. He knew something was wrong. Something different was happening, but he wasn't sure what it was. Maayan said Ron even told her that he thought terrorists were on the base, but she didn't believe him. How could that be possible? His last text to her said, they're coming in. I love you. Several red hearts. And then he said, it's over. Ron's mother thought he was dead. But later that afternoon, she was shown a Hamas video of him being taken. And then she saw another Hamas video in which her son was standing up, alive. This was the third time that day that Maayan had told her son's story. When I asked what gave her the strength, she said, I love him, and I can't imagine living without him. I'm not sad, she said. I believe he's still alive. But it is like a stone on my heart every day. It's there in the morning when I wake up, and it's there until I fall asleep. I haven't cried, but it's like I can't breathe. Maayan, like the other families of those kidnapped by Hamas, is urging the world to continue to keep up the pressure to bring the hostages home. What they want most right now is for the Red Cross to secure proof of life, to establish who is still alive, and let their families know. I promised that I would share Ron's story with our community when I got back home, and that we would do what we could. As I walked through the empty hall leading to the departures gate at Ben Gurion Airport, the wall was lined with posters of all of the hostages, more than 240. It took 3 full minutes to walk the length of the posters and video them all. Seeing their faces together, the babies and the elderly and the teenagers and the parents took my breath away. One hostage would be too many. 240 people kidnapped from their homes is hard to grasp. It's the same number of people as in our entire religious school K-12. It's almost a full sanctuary. And every single person who was taken has a family who desperately wants them to come home. So I'm asking you tonight, call your senators and your representatives and ask them to ensure that the US government continues to do all it can to get proof of life and bring them all home. Share the pictures and stories of those who were kidnapped on social media, and don't let the world forget about them. Keep Ron and all of the other hostages in your prayers and in your hearts and in the public eye. At Hadassah Hospital in Jerusalem, I met Michal, a mother of 10 who frequently volunteers with her husband and kids on army bases during Shabbat. They make dinner, teach, and sing, and their children play with the soldiers. She said it's a lot of fun. On October 7th, Michal and her family were at Zekim near the Gaza border. Friday night had been very peaceful with a Shabbat dinner and special treats for Simchat Torah. Saturday morning, she woke at 6:30 a.m. to the sounds of the red alert siren over and over and over again. They heard what sounded like bombs and quickly moved to the shelter along with many of the soldiers. Michal's youngest is only a year old, and she told us it was a miracle she remembered to grab his pacifier. In the shelter, the commanders kept being called out, and none of them came back in. At one point, a female soldier was wounded and brought to another shelter nearby. Michal is a nurse by training. And so she left her family and went to help care for the soldier. She couldn't figure out what caused the injury. She had been told that the soldier fell. But she did what she could to wipe the blood from the soldier's face and keep her still. Later, she found out that the soldier named Noah had been shot in the eye and that the bullet was lodged in her skull, which was why there was no exit wound. As Michal was caring for Noah, a terrorist approached the entrance to their shelter and killed the soldier who was standing guard. They pulled his body inside. A few minutes later, another soldier came to the door. Michal noticed that his uniform looked a little different. The colors were not quite right. And then that soldier looked her in the eye, and she knew. He raised his rifle and shot her in the arm 3 times. She felt her hand drop to her side. Miraculously, he turned and walked away. And she thought to herself, I'm okay. Even if I lose my arm, I'm alive, and I'm going back to my kids. Michal unwrapped her headscarf and made a tourniquet for herself and walked with a soldier back to the other shelter to be with her family. She told her husband, who in her words couldn't deal with blood or any kind of mess, that he needed to press as hard as he could any place where he saw red. Many hours later, they were evacuated to a nearby hospital by a civilian who had commandeered an ambulance, and Michal had her first surgery. When we met her, she had just completed her 3rd surgery. It was beginning rehab. With her arm still in a sling, Michal told us that she was the lucky one. She survived. Her husband and her children survived. Noah, the soldier she helped, miraculously survived. And as she finished her story, Michal said, "The Jewish people is strong. We will get through this together, and afterwards, we will be even stronger." At the Olive Tree Hotel in Jerusalem, I met with mothers who were evacuated from Sderot and a psychologist who leads trauma therapy workshops for children and parents. And in Mitzpeh Ramon, I saw the daycare that Kibbutz Erez members started for the youngest evacuees and visited a school established only 5 days ago for the older children. In just 2 days, I met so many amazing people and heard such powerful stories. Stories of grief and loss, trauma and pain, and also stories of strength and heroism, grit, determination, and communal care. On our initial Zoom call before we left for Israel, someone suggested that maybe we shouldn't smile in the pictures that we took while we were there. And Michal Tzur, our federation's representative in Israel, herself an evacuee from Kibbutz Erez on the Gaza border, spoke up to disagree. "We should smile," she said. "We're alive, and we're here, and we need to remember that." This is a devastating time. We don't even know if we can smile. And yet we are alive. We are here, and so is Israel. Jerusalem is still beautiful in the morning sunlight. The Jewish people still lives and will continue to live. Am Yisrael Chai, we will continue to live on, now and tomorrow and the next day and the next. Shabbat Shalom.